Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to tackle a word that you hear absolutely everywhere: inflation. It's that invisible force that just seems to make everything more expensive. But what is it really? Well, let's solve this mystery together. So, to get started, let's just take a quick trip back in time all the way to 1920s Germany. I want you to picture this. You walk into a bakery to buy a loaf of bread, and the price tag is literally millions, sometimes even billions, of marks. I'm not kidding. People had to haul wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy groceries. This isn't some dystopian fantasy. This is a real-world example of what happens when inflation just completely goes off the rails. Just look at this number: 200 billion. That was the price of a single loaf of bread in Germany at the peak of its hyperinflation. I mean, when numbers get this huge, money just starts to lose all meaning, doesn't it? It basically becomes worthless paper. Now, this is the extreme for sure, but it perfectly illustrates the core problem we're going to unpack today. And that brings us to the big question, right? Why does the money in your pocket buy less today than it did yesterday? Why did a movie ticket cost, I don't know, 25 cents decades ago, but now it's 15 bucks? To understand this, we're not going to use a bunch of complicated charts or graphs. No, we're going to use a simple story. So let's just imagine a tiny, self-contained village, okay? This village has just one market where everyone buys everything they need. By shrinking the entire global economy down to this one little place, we can actually see how inflation works in a much, much clearer way. So our story starts in this village. Everything's pretty normal, prices are stable, people are just going about their daily lives. But then, one day, something happens, something that changes everything. The government decides, you know what? This little village economy needs a bit of a boost. So the government rolls in with two things. First, a giant pile of cash for everybody, and second, a message for the local bank. They say, hey, make your loans really, really cheap. We want people to borrow money and spend it. And just like that, suddenly, everyone in the village has way more money than they've ever had before. And what do people do when they suddenly feel rich? You guessed it, they spend. The villagers all rush down to the market. You know that fancy electric bike they'd been kind of dreaming about? Before it was a maybe one day, but now with all this extra cash burning a hole in their pockets, it's a yes, right now. Now, the shop owner, he is thrilled. I mean, business is absolutely booming. But there's a problem. He's selling bikes way faster than he can get them back in stock. In fact, he's starting to run out of pretty much everything. All these villagers with all this new money are buying way more than usual. The demand for his goods is now way, way higher than the supply. So the shop owner looks at his last few bikes, and then he looks at the long line of people desperate to buy them. And he has a very simple realization. He thinks, wait a minute, I can't keep up with all this demand, so I should probably raise my prices. And that's exactly what he does. And that moment, right there, is inflation in its simplest form.
And that's really the heart of it. That's inflation. It's just too much money chasing too few goods. It's a sustained rise in prices all across the board. The dollar in your pocket is, well, it's still a dollar, but its purchasing power, what it can actually buy, has gone down.
This whole situation seems a little bit chaotic, doesn't it? A village gets flooded with cash, which leads to shortages, which leads to higher prices. It really makes you wonder, is anyone actually steering this ship? Is there someone in charge of managing how much money is floating around? And the answer is yes, there is. Most countries have something called a central bank. Just think of it as the bank for all the other banks. Their job isn't to make money for themselves. Their job is to basically babysit the entire economy, trying to keep it growing nice and smoothly. In a way, they're the puppet master. Now, I know what you're thinking. That quote sounds a little creepy, right? But honestly, it's a really good analogy. Central banks, like the Federal Reserve in the US or the European Central Bank, they pull certain strings in the economy to get us, consumers and businesses, to behave in certain ways. And for the most part, it actually works. So what's their biggest string to pull? It's the interest rate. When they lower interest rates, it becomes cheaper to borrow money for a car or a house or a new factory. And that encourages spending and gets the economy going. But when they raise interest rates, borrowing becomes more expensive. People and businesses are more likely to save their money instead of spending it, which cools things down. So up to this point, inflation seems like the bad guy. I mean, our money becomes worth less, prices go up. What's to like? But is it always the enemy? To answer that, we have to look at the opposite. What happens when prices consistently go down?
To get this, let's use a really simple analogy. Let's talk about beer. With inflation, the money you have today buys you a smaller beer tomorrow. Your purchasing power shrinks. But with deflation, the opposite happens. Your money actually becomes more valuable over time. It buys you a bigger beer tomorrow. A bigger beer for the same price? That sounds amazing, doesn't it? I mean, who wouldn't want their money to become more powerful over time? But in the world of economics, things are almost never that simple. Deflation is actually considered way, way more dangerous than a little bit of inflation. And this shows you exactly why. Just think about it. If you know that bike is going to be cheaper next month, why would you buy it today? You wouldn't. You'd wait. But if everyone waits, well, companies stop selling things. To survive, they have to cut back on production and lay off workers. Then those workers who just got laid off have no income, so they spend even less. This kicks off a catastrophic downward spiral called a doom loop, and it can lead straight into a severe recession or even a depression. And that is exactly why those puppet masters at the central banks don't aim for zero inflation. They actually want a little bit of it. Their target is usually right around 2% per year. That small, steady rise in prices is seen as the sweet spot. It encourages us to spend, it keeps the economy growing, and maybe most importantly, it keeps us far, far away from that deflation doom loop. It's a target a lot of us have become very familiar with lately, as we've seen what happens when inflation goes way above it. Okay, so we've covered the village, the puppet master, the dangers of deflation. But let's bring all of this home. What does this complicated web of economic theory actually mean for your wallet, for your savings, and for your future? So, what are the big takeaways here? Well, first, any cash you have loses value over time. That means stuffing money under your mattress is a losing game. Second, while inflation is bad for people who save, it's actually pretty good for people who have debt. If you have a fixed-rate mortgage, the real value of that debt actually shrinks over time. And finally, just remember that a little bit of this is happening on purpose. It's all part of the grand plan to keep the economic engine running. And let's not forget what happens in the extreme case. In Venezuela, inflation got so completely out of control that their currency, the bolivar, became essentially worthless. I mean, artists on the street literally started weaving purses and crafts out of the cash itself because the paper was more valuable as a craft material than it was as actual money. And that brings us to maybe the most mind-bending point of all. You see, unlike in the past, our money isn't backed by a physical thing like gold anymore. Its value comes from one thing and one thing only, our collective faith that it's worth something. It's a system built entirely on human psychology and trust. So, our entire modern economy is this incredibly delicate balancing act. The puppet masters are constantly pulling strings, trying to encourage growth without letting inflation run wild, all while making sure we steer clear of that deflation cliff. The ultimate question isn't just whether the system works today, but for how much longer they can really maintain this fragile balance. Thanks for watching.